If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to the first part of a new column called Speculative Whiteness. My name is Alan Bailey, and I'll be your co-host for this column. In this column, I'm going to be discussing racism and the alt-right with Dr. Jordan Carroll. At this moment, we are looking at a 5-part audio column. We haven't recorded all of it yet, though, so changes could happen. In the first episode, we get to know Dr. Carroll, the academic altruist himself, how he got into speculative fiction, his fandoms, and the recent Hugo nominations for his book, Speculative Whiteness, Science Fiction and the Alt-Right. Dr. Jordan S. Carroll is the author of Speculative Whiteness, Science Fiction and the Alt-Right, published by University of Minnesota Press, 2024, and Reading the Obscene, Transgressive Editors and the Class Politics of U.S. Literature, Stanford University Press, 2021. His latest work is a Hugo finalist for Best Related Work, and his first book won the MLA Prize for Independent Scholars. He was also the recipient of the David G. Hartwell Emerging Scholar Award by the International Association for the Fantastic in the Arts. Carroll's writing has appeared in Kaleidotrope, American Literature, Post 45, Polygon, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and The Nation. You can find a link to his publisher's site in the notes. Today we are here with Dr. Jordan Carroll, and we are going to talk about his book, Speculative Whiteness, Science Fiction and the Alt-Right. Before we get started, I'm really curious to know a little bit about you, Jordan, and how you got involved in genre and stuff like that. So let's just start out with you telling us about yourself in general.
Sure, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I am a writer and educator. I did my PhD in English literature at the University of California, Davis. My first book is called Reading the Obscene, Transgressive Editors and the Class Politics of U.S. Literature. And my latest book, as you pointed out, is Speculative Whiteness, Science Fiction and the Alt-Right. I've been interested in science fiction and fantasy and horror really my whole life. I grew up reading authors like Phillip K Dick and Ursula K. Le Guin. I'm big into gaming. I play Dungeons and Dragons and other games,
Nice.
as well as painting up fantasy miniatures and stuff like that. When I teach, I often teach authors like Ursula K. Le Guin and Octavia Butler. So really, it's something that I've pursued my whole life, and now I'm trying to write science fiction and fantasy as well.
Oh, okay. Interesting. You'll have to hit us up when you start getting some work out there. Very interesting.
Yeah, I got my first publication recently. It's out in Kaleidotrope.
Excellent. All right, everybody, go check out the Kaleidotrope. Which issue?
It just came out, so earlier this month.
Okay, so for everybody who's listening to this in the future, that is in April of 2025. So go and check that out. Okay, that's cool. So, you and I would probably be friends then.
Yeah, definitely.
It's funny that you mentioned Phillip K. Dick. I'm already going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but my one co-host and I have an argument about who's better, Robert Heinlein or Phillip K. Dick. She hates Phillip K. Dick, and I am not a big fan of Robert Heinlein. What is your opinion on this matter?
I think that, Phillip K. Dick, definitely better. Heinlein can be interesting, politically dicey, but always interesting. But I feel like Phillip K. Dick just has such a range of ideas. And even when he's writing a potboiler that is kind of all over the place and messy, it's still, he's saying something that nobody else is saying. Like even when he's in his, his Gnostic sort of break with reality period, I think he's still someone that's saying things that are new and strange and mind-bending.
Ooh, I love it. I love it. Okay, Diane, you heard it. One more point for PKD. So, you mentioned that you got into science fiction, fantasy, and horror when you were young. Did you have like a one specific author that kind of brought you in, or a specific genre that you really focused on that you enjoyed?
Let's see. I mean, I read a lot of H.P. Lovecraft when I was really young,
Mm-hmm.
um, which we might talk about later in terms of the politics of that as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was a particular gateway. In middle school, it was the giant fat fantasy
Oh
paperbacks.
God. Yeah.
But Tolkien obviously was a big influence when I first started reading. I loved The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Constantly reading Michael Moorcock growing up. Those were the kinds of mainstays of my early reading years.
Awesome. Awesome. And Tolkien is such a gateway drug for so many people. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. Like,
Yeah.
it's funny because people either love him or hate him, and yet he's brought the masses. And I can see both sides of that argument.
Yeah, it's interesting because I love Tolkien, but I taught a class once where we had moments where we were critiquing Tolkien, and I've never had as much pushback in the classroom. Like in some ways, like if you love Tolkien, it can be very hard to kind of, I don't know, think about him in a historical way sometimes because he feels so with us and so all encompassing in some ways.
Oh God, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm curious. So you kind of gave us your professional background a little bit, but can you tell us how you ended up writing about science fiction, fantasy, and transgressive writers? Like, how did that become a topic of interest to you, and how does that work for you academically? Or maybe I should say professionally.
Yeah, I've worked on this for a while. I did my master's thesis at Miami University of Ohio on utopianism, looking to some extent at Marge Piercy, but mainly Samuel Delany, and thinking about science fiction in that context. But I also had a more recent project where I was interested in looking at how both science fiction fans and computer programmers experience time,
Huh.
the ways that both readers and coders get lost in the text or and feel like time has stopped, or the sense of like not always moving forward with normative life goals according to the broader societal conception of them. Being stuck at one age or being stuck with one media and going back to it again and again. And while I was researching that, I was reading some right wing blogs and looking at the rabid puppies controversy as well. And I started
Mm,
digging into some of that and thinking about the ways that time and a sense of temporality turned out to be really important for those kinds of debates.
interesting. So interesting. I kind of want to go back and see what you discovered about the genre fans and the computer programmers, and how how do you say that, how they experience time. That's super interesting.
Yeah, it's. I think at least one of the articles is available online in Post 45 to the general public if people want to read that. I don't think it's behind a paywall.
Super interesting. We might have to talk about that some other time. Wow, that's really
Yeah.
it's funny going back to the PKD stuff. That's something about PKD that I have always appreciated. Here's me going off on a tangent again, but as someone who's neurodivergent, I've always
Mhm.
felt as an outsider, but not just because of my neurodivergence, but because of like how I experience things differently than other people.
Mhm.
But I think that's one of the reasons why I'm really drawn to PKD, because he kind of plays with that whole like, what is reality? You know, um, you can easily throw time in there, right? Like, how do you
Yeah.
experience time? And like, how do you is this wall real, or like,
Mhm.
and all this kind of stuff. That's just really fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, he's so into alternative histories,
Oh yeah.
but also, um, for example, like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is all about time. Like the time is
Yeah.
entropy, and when they go into that space with Mercer, they're kind of entering this world that somehow reverses entropy and finds a place outside of time.
I love that book too. I really need to go back and reread that one. That was
Yeah.
always been one of my favorites. So let's get back to you a little bit here. Have you ever had a big part in fandom? And that could include conferences too. Like, how do you experience fandom?
I mean, I do a lot of fanish activities. I do tabletop role playing, and I read and engage with fan culture and study fan culture. But I haven't been to a lot of conventions. I've been to one or two gaming conventions way back in the day.
Hmm.
I mean, I think the closest thing I have experienced to that is something like the International Conference for the Fantastic and the Arts, which is yeah, ICFA, yeah, combines scholarly with more writerly approaches to science fiction and other speculative genres. Like it's always nice to go there and see not only other scholars who are working on this topic, but also run into big names in science fiction and fantasy and related genres.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. That's one of those ones I've been wanting to get to for a long time. I've just never had the time or the money at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely worth it.
So you mentioned that you haven't been to a lot of conferences, but this year you were just very recently. In fact, it was announced that you're a finalist for the Hugos.
Mhm.
First of all, how did you feel about that? And then my second question would be, what is your plans for the conference?
I mean, I was so blown away by that. I didn't expect that, and it's been great to see that this book is resonating with science fiction and other kinds of genre fans because I didn't just want this to be something that other scholars would look at. I wanted to engage in that larger conversation about race and politics in fandom. So I'm really glad that at least some people seem to be resonating with this, and I'm really excited to go to Worldcon this year. I'll definitely be there,
Awesome.
and it'll be nice to meet a bunch of people.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's gonna be cool. So earlier we talked about some of the authors that really got you into science fiction and fantasy. I'm curious who your favorite authors are right now.
Let's see. Lately, I've been reading Sophia Samatar and Adrian Tchaikovsky.
Mm-hmm.
But my all time favorites are probably, for one, Samuel Delaney.
Mm.
But I also really love the work of Ted Chiang
Hmm.
and Peter Watts as well.
Oh, okay, interesting, interesting. I've read a lot of Ted Chiang. I've read some Sophia Samatar, mostly short fiction. I haven't read any of her longer stuff. Adrian Tchaikovsky, oh man, his stuff looks so good. I could just never quite get myself to his work, which is so sad. That's part of the problem with being a science fiction podcast host slash reviewer is I'm just like constantly, I literally have a reading schedule that I have to stick to. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, yeah. He has some great world building.
That's what it seems like. So you mentioned that you're an academic, and I don't know if I want to say well known, but it's thought, at least felt throughout the community, that a lot of academics kind of treat genre poorly, don't take it seriously. I think some of this is just from historical things that have happened. And I personally have not run into that recently myself, but I'm curious how your colleagues feel about your study of the genre.
I think it may have been true that at one point science fiction was neglected, but in recent years, it's really become one of the dominant genres in English departments. I mean, most departments now will have often like an introductory level class on science fiction and fantasy, in part because they know that is what a lot of people are into, and that draws people into the classroom. But it's been pretty well supported. I mean, this project I think has been fairly well received among the academics that I've come into contact with. And again, I think that's in part because we've seen probably in the last couple decades, like science fiction become so central to all of culture. I mean, I guess, a post Star Wars world, we're now,
Hmm.
it's not a niche genre. It's now something that most people are at least somewhat familiar with, and is increasingly influential in tech culture. Silicon Valley is organized around often fantasies from the science fiction world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think people have come to see that not only is this driving blockbuster films and much of the publishing industry, but also it's become increasingly influential to the politics of technology.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting to see it go from what it was when I was a kid, which was kind of like, this is what the nerds read, right? To just being this
Mhm,
all-encompassing thing, with the Marvel movies and all this other kind of stuff. Yeah.
mhm, mhm.
That's cool, though. I'm glad to see that your experience with academia has been very positive with this. I know about, I want to say 5, 6, 7 years ago, something like that, I helped write a course on Mars in the, what was it? Mars in the Literary Imagination or something like that was the name of the course.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was a really cool. It was a really cool course. It was, I would say, during the peak of Elon Musk's popularity and people wanting to, really thinking about going to Mars and all in a serious way. It was cool to go back and kind of survey all the literature about Mars and then come up with this course and have it like readily accepted, because I know it's not always easy to have a course accepted by the committee. What are some interesting things that you've discovered about, science fiction, fantasy, horror that you didn't expect during your research over the years?
I think the biggest shock working on this project was just how long fascism has been part of science fiction fandom. At first, like a lot of people, I saw the alt-right as almost a group of outside agitators who are
Hmm.
trying to get into the field and subvert it for their own purposes. The more I looked, the farther back I saw fascism in fan circles. I look at, for example, a guy named James H. Madel, who was the first major leader of a neo-Nazi party in the United States. And he comes right out of science fiction fandom. So
Huh.
it's been there almost as long as there has been a fandom. And so I think that kind of disabused me of the notion that science fiction and fascist ideology are somehow completely separate from one another. There's that tendency, and it's always fought and always struggled against, but that tendency is not something that emerged in the last decade or two.
And that's all for this episode. Don't forget to rate and review us if you like what we're doing. If you'd like to support us monetarily, you can find us on Patreon and Ko-fi, that's Kofi. In the next episode of this series that we are calling Alt-Right Nerd, we start to get into this book discussing how the alt-right uses fandom to attract nerds to their cause. We start to learn about the nerds themselves and why they might be attracted to the alt-right. And we also discuss how fandom influences the alt-right. Keep an eye out for that episode coming soon.